Hey everyone, welcome back to Todos Santos. This is episode number 17, and today, as you can see, we're jumping back in time just a little bit to before what we built last episode. And the reason we're doing that, just for this quick section, is to take a look at this stadium that I placed. And this is what we're going to be centering around this episode. And we're just kind of finishing off the neighborhood that we started last episode by putting together this main focus of this district. So we're starting off bringing this road all the way around the stadium. I wanted it to have kind of an area where people could filter through and go in a circle, like if there were a big event going on and the parking was pretty full, they'd be able to they wouldn't have to, go all the way around the block or something. They'd have this road right next to the stadium that they could pass through. And it does this little corner here under the tram depot, which I thought was kind of cool, using the tunnel there to go under that. And just generally kind of dealing with that sloped terrain there. It's always fun. And I just wanted to make sure that these highway exit signs were accurate, since those exits there are primarily heading toward this stadium. I wanted those to reflect that, so I put those down there. And now we're back in real time after episode 16, and we're fully into episode 17, putting down these two parking garages. I didn't want the stadium to be completely surrounded by parking, like a lot of them are in real life, but I did want there to be some parking. I imagine this is like a more recent development. They'd want to give in to those pressures of like a minimum parking amount, and just easier accessibility for people who aren't on the transportation network, or, for some other reason can't use it. So we have some parking, and that's okay. I think this really skinny spot in between the frontage road and the stadium was kind of a good place to fit that in, as opposed to just filling it with some trees or something. So I kind of like that being there. And then, of course, we have to have a fence here to keep people from falling over the ledge there. I'm using the seawall to cover up that gap there underneath the road. And then when you have like a road directly underneath another road, which the game really doesn't like, it puts these like weird shadows on the top road. And so what I did is just put some ploppable pavement in there, or ploppable asphalt, I guess. And then I placed some like sealed crack decals on top, as if this small portion of the road has kind of been crumbling and they've come back over and sealed up those cracks. But it's really just there to cover up that weird visual glitch that the terrain causes. And now I'm just absolutely overloading this area with trees and grass and shrubbery, and it's probably a little overkill for this area, but we don't do this too many places, at least from now on. So I'll let myself get away with it this time. And now we're using these great breakwater rocks just to kind of show, or I guess hide the end of the seawall there and transition into a more natural grassy hill. And here you can see those sealed crack decals I was talking about. And just to go with that theme of this part is sort of crumbling and probably not the best built spot ever, put some cracks and weeds down at the bottom. And then I figured that road there would need some speed bumps because there's going to be a lot of pedestrian traffic, at least in theory. And now we're going to throw some details down on this parking garage, just make it look a little bit friendlier. And I'll let you watch that, and I'll be back after the segment. Hope you enjoy it. So now we're starting on this pedestrian crossing from the parking garage over to the stadium. I figured that it would be better for the pedestrians to be able to cross over here instead of going down to the street and then crossing, or walking all the way up that road that we made and then crossing, and it's just overall safer and better. So we're doing that, and I'm using that really nice pedestrian crossing asset. And this is a fantastic elevator asset, and it's actually functional, which is great. So I've been using this all over the city, clipping it into buildings, and using various different pedestrian crossing assets to connect to that. And I think this is one of my favorite, more urban kind of asset that I have in this collection. So that's pretty cool. And there's a whole set of them with varying heights, so it'll pretty much fit into any situation. I highly recommend looking into those if you need something of that sort. And I just thought it was kind of interesting to connect these two buildings, because in the base game, most of the buildings are separated. They don't really allow you to connect them like that. Whereas in real urban environments, you often do get different connections like that. And now I make a really weird decision to kind of break up the pavement texture here by using the parking lot roads asset here to get this. I mean, it has a great pavement texture, but this it ends up giving me a lot of trouble in terms of blending it into the surrounding environment. And also whenever I move it with the mod Move It, this pedestrian crossing collapses down to ground level, which is really just kind of annoying. I mean, it's easily fixable, and it ends up, obviously being fine in the final build. It's just kind of annoying that it keeps doing that. Also sort of funny. And the reason I'm using this parking lot road really is that this stadium asset has these parking lots included in it. And instead of going into the asset editor and just removing them, I kind of wanted to work with it because I figured they'd have some parking lots here for right adjacent to the stadium for staff, or people who need closer access to the entrances or whatever. So that's what that's for. And there's another one on the opposite corner of the stadium, which ends up looking exactly the same like the front one. So what I'm going to show in this episode is me detailing this front part, and then also this little loading zone area, and then off screen I just replicate that around back. And I figured they'd need a little bit more of a utilitarian kind of loading area. I'm sure there are concessions and everything in the stadium, so they need this part. And so I just clipped in a couple plain looking industrial buildings with those loading bays. And now we're going around and putting in these awesome door assets, like this sliding door asset, which I've been using all over the city because it's pretty much the only pedestrian-sized door asset that I have in my collection. I know there's a new pack out that has some more different styles of doors, so I'll probably download that at some point. But I think this one works really well for the stadium. And as far as the stadium asset is concerned, it's not the most detailed, but it looks nice overall. The model's nice, and it looks great from a distance, at least before the LED loads. So I decided to stick with that asset and then just add some details to kind of fill in the detail that it's lacking in the model itself. And then I figured there would need to be some fence separation between this utilitarian industrial looking area and the road there that's going to have all kinds of traffic. And now coming up, I'm going to start having some serious difficulties with this parking lot road as I try to, it looks a little strange just to have this rectangle of concrete with no connection to the actual road system. So I end up trying to blend it in after I do this first attempt at a pedestrian area. You can see me, I've sped it up just because I tried so many different ways of getting these streets to connect, and none of them worked. So I just ended up going back to how I had it before. And as you'll see in a second, we just use a driveway prop to bridge the gap between this parking lot and the road, which I think is not the best solution, but I just couldn't get anything else to work. And we also put down this ploppable pavement here just to extend out the kind of usable area for pedestrians up to the edges of the parking lot. And here's that driveway prop, which obviously, it's not the best look, but I think it's better than all the other things I tried, so we'll stick with that. And now we're adding these 3 parking spots here. I think it's kind of nice to when you're making a parking lot to kind of just go outside the bounds of like making a square parking lot, which is obviously it's the easiest to do. And if you're just fitting in a small parking lot somewhere, that's fine. But for big areas like this, I think it's kind of nice to just fill every available spot with parking spots or other decorations. And it just helps to blend it in more when it's not just a square set of parking spots. And we're going to fill in the rest of this plain pavement with a pedestrian area with a little bit of landscaping, some benches and that sort of thing. And I imagine that, when people are waiting for an event here or a game or whatever, and they'd show up hours early, and so they'd need, a somewhat nice place to hang out. So we put down a bunch of benches and kind of just fill in these gaps in the stadium asset just to kind of make it blend in a little bit better. And we're using this plaster wall asset that I like so much. It seems to fit in well with the style of the city, in addition to this stadium asset in particular. We also use some of these brick ploppable surfaces, which I like for delineating pedestrian areas. We're using some of those curb assets, and also we're throwing down some pedestrian paths so that people actually walk around this area and into and through the stadium. So I'm going to let you watch me put down some of these details, and I'll be back in just a minute. I hope you enjoy this segment. Welcome back. Now we're going back here really quickly and just filling in this last little gap in the parking lot with some curbs so that people can actually walk along here without having to walk through the parking lot. And I'd like to show you the stadiums that were sort of involved in inspiring this area. First, we have the Coliseo de Puerto Rico in San Juan. And I mostly use this for kind of the surroundings and the location. You can see like the metro line running right by there with that curved station roof. And, the parking lots and the style of buildings around it. So that was what I mostly used for inspiration. And here we have the Maracanã Stadium in Rio, in Brazil, of course. And that's a really nice stadium. And of course, that's the actual asset, or at least what the asset is modeled after. So it's kind of a combination of those two areas and stadiums, both of which I think are pretty cool, pretty interesting. So here we're trying to cover up the vanilla tunnel asset there, which it's all right, but I just wanted this area to be a little more detailed. So we have this seawall here to hold it up, and then we have this little grass area, which I thought was kind of nice. I could imagine like having an office in that building right there and looking out over this little tiny patch of green in this sea of concrete. That's kind of cool. And these vanilla trees here are built into the asset, and because it's technically a sub-building of the main asset, I can't access it, at least as far as I know, with Prop It Up, which I've been using a lot of in this city. So what I do is just kind of hide this little parking maintenance area back here with a big garage door. And those trees, I basically cover them up with taller tree assets from the workshop and make it into a little park. And so I just wanted to work with that instead of, again, taking this asset into the asset editor and removing it. And I think it's sometimes just more fun to kind of work with what you have within the limitations of the asset rather than just having a completely blank, clean slate. Sometimes, obviously, you really do need to go in and remove some of those terrible props and trees, but not always. And here we're continuing with the idea that this is sort of a walkable area that's not just used for events. It's also a place where people come to hang out, at least before and after sporting events or concerts or whatever. So we have this little park back here. It's a little disused, there are some cracks and stuff, but it wouldn't be the worst place to hang out. And here I wanted to cover up the base of that building there with something a little nicer. And that floating lamp there is really annoying me. I'm going to go back in at some point and remove that with the Prop It Up mod. And as you can see, I put those red brick surface decals over here, basically replicating what we did in the front. By the way, I'm using that ploppable asphalt there to cover up that crosswalk stop bar. And I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but this footage is pretty old. I have mentioned that, but currently there's a mod that allows you to, when you disable pedestrian crossings with the traffic manager, it actually hides the visual of the crosswalk. So I've been using that, and that's probably one of my favorite mods, at least one of my new favorite mods. And I continue to have some trouble here when the sub-building catches on fire. For some reason, the fire engines don't seem to want to go to the sub-building and do their job. So this corner of the stadium ends up being completely burnt down, and off-screen I have to delete the entire asset and then replace it and reconfigure everything that gets displaced. So that was fun. But I do now have a mod that just completely disables buildings catching on fire because I was having a lot of issues with that with some dense neighborhoods that I'm building later, which will be in later episodes. So that won't be an issue anymore. And now we're adding some bus lines. We're adding some to the neighborhood we made last episode in addition to the stadium area. And I'm really enjoying, as I'm building, extending these bus lines as opposed to planning them in advance. And it just feels a little bit more natural to have them fit into this kind of weird road system that we've created. And we end up, changing it as we go. It's pretty flexible. And that's how I like to make bus routes, I guess. And for these stops, I like to have some variety. Some of them are just, signs telling you what buses stop here, what the schedule is. And some of them are a little more built up like this. So I imagine the more urban and wealthy areas have the nicer bus stops. And the less dense or less well-off areas just have very simple bus stops with only a bench or only even just a schedule and a sign. Moving into the last portion of the episode, we're going to be making a little bit of a commercial pedestrian mall here next to the stadium. I figured there was a little bit too much space here just to make like a park, so I wanted to have some businesses that I figured would have sprung up around the time the stadium was made, and maybe this area was touted as being, good for establishing a business or something. So we have a few small commercial areas here with a pedestrian road that connects into the stadium, and I imagine this would be part of this whole ethos we're going with, where this is like a pedestrian destination in addition to just a practical area to fit a stadium into. So we have a barbecue place, some sort of art shop, and then a surf shop, which seems like a strange selection for this sort of place, since it's not really near the ocean or really an area where people would go surfing at all, so whatever. And then there's a little bit of a coffee shop and some generic strip mall store just to fill in that last space there. And we're detailing this little patio here, which I imagine would be pretty nice to hang out there, have some barbecue on this patio next to this beautiful stadium. So I'm going to let you watch me detail this area a bit, and I'll be back in just a minute. I hope you enjoy this segment. Now we're filling in this gap between the stadium and the pedestrian mall with some landscaping, which in retrospect I kind of wish I had just left it a little bit more open to make it more pedestrian friendly and kind of integrated together better, but I'm not too worried about it. I think it still looks pretty nice and is functional, so that's okay. And I'd like to mention there are a couple things I made off screen that there just wasn't time for in this episode. I detailed the fire station, which is to the right here. You might see it when I zoom out a little bit. I made a couple apartment buildings, a taxi building and taxi lot, and you'll see all those in the cinematics, so hopefully those are to your liking. And to finish off this episode, we're putting down some lamps, and in just a second we're going to move on to a little park that's kind of in between some of the apartments and office buildings that I placed down off screen, and I just thought it was kind of cool, and it's a nice spot that's featured in the cinematics, so I thought I'd show it. But first we're going to put down these ploppable surface props really quickly, just to cover up that weird square at the intersection of the pedestrian streets. And we have some PPG benches, so people actually come and use this area, and people do walk through this area, which is nice. And I'm not sure how realistic using wooden fences here is. That seems kind of suspect to do in like a very humid place, but I'm not sure. I'll have to do some research about that. So we have some young trees, and now we're moving on to that little statue park that I mentioned. So I thought this little triangle here was just asking for some kind of urban looking park. So we have this statue with this plaster wall, which I kind of like slope up and down just as like a artistic detail as opposed to any sort of functional aspect to it. I don't know. I do that in a few areas in the city. I guess that's just one of those themes they're going with, kind of like the lily pillies and the palm trees and everything like that we're reusing throughout the city. And I thought this might be a little bit of an older area, so it has some old cobblestones peeking through there as this pavement has been degrading over time. And filling in this grass area a little bit with some shrubs, which I think looks nicer than just the plain grass. And using all these high poly trees that are going to kill my frame rate, but totally worth it. And that's about all she wrote for this episode, so I'd like to say thank you so much for watching this episode of Todos Santos. I hope you enjoy the cinematics, and by the way, next week Alpenglow will be back, and if you're new to my channel, since I've uploaded a video in that series, it's a less detailed, more expansion-based snowfall city, so I hope to see you there. Here's a quick recap of what we did the last 2 episodes, and then the cinematics. Again, thank you so much for watching. Adios.